There it
Can you,
goes.
okay. Do you still see my PowerPoint or do you see the Zoom?
I still see the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Let me get that out of here. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started. I'm Meg Reed. I'm the Senior Coastal Policy Specialist with the Oregon Department of Land Conservation Development and leading this rulemaking effort on coastal public access. We're on the home stretch right now, so this is our final Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting. So thanks so much for being here today and for being with us throughout this process. As a reminder, we are recording this session and also live streaming to our DLCD YouTube channel. And everything that we do is public record, including the chat and all of that. So you should be able to chat to everyone and to the hosts, but not individually to each other. I'm only on one screen today because I'm actually in the Salem office. So I'm going to be using a lot of paper notes to make sure I remember everything. So forgive me if I'm a little bit clunky today with my technology, but I want to make sure we cover everything that we need to. All right, so let me move on. Okay, so we are on Zoom, and I think you're all probably pros on this at this point, but just a few reminders that please keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. During most of the meeting today will be in discussion, so please turn on your videos for that if you can. But we will have a little bit of presentation in the beginning to talk about the rules, so it's fine to keep your video off for that portion. To speak, please raise your hand or use the chat. And then, as I've mentioned, please rename yourself in Zoom with your first and last name and your affiliation. And if you have any troubles with technology, please reach out to Mandy. We're not going to do verbal introductions today, so if you could just write again your name and affiliation in the chat just for everyone, that would be really helpful. And I'll just call out the people who are here from DLCD on the meeting today. We have Mandy McNabb, who is our Coastal Rules Coordinator and providing a lot of support for this rulemaking effort. She is not feeling great today, so we'll try not to make her talk too much because she's losing her voice. But we also have Matthew Hampton, who is our rules coordinator supporting this effort as well. We have Lisa Phipps, who's the Oregon Coastal Management Program Manager, as well as the manager of the Oregon or the Coastal Services Division at DLCD. We have Casey Markowitz, who is our grants coordinator, and Hui Radomski, who is our South Coast Regional Representative. And did I miss anyone else from DLCD? Great. Okay, so again, if you can please just put that in the chat, all of our RAC members, and then I will also hand it over to Commissioner Leanne Thompson, who is serving as our liaison to the Land Conservation and Development Commission to give us some opening remarks. So Commissioner Thompson, take it away. Uh-oh, maybe some technical difficulties. I just saw her. Well, we can come back to her.
Yeah, it looks like she got booted off.
Oh
I
no.
saw her and then now she's disappeared.
Uh-oh. Okay, well, we will have her give some opening remarks when she gets back on. So I will move us on to our agenda slide so we can all get on the same page for today's meeting. So it is our last meeting and we'll wrap up by 4 p.m. today. So hopefully we'll get through everything. I'm going to start with a summary of the revised rules for coastal public access. And these are, I'll talk through basically what the rules say at the moment. and what has changed since our last Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting, which was way back in February. We've had lots of other meetings and hearings and public comment periods since that, so they have changed based on those different forms of feedback. And so I'll go through all those sections today. And then following that, we're going to have a little bit of a change in the agenda from what was published in your rule packet. It's just all the same topics, but in a different order. So after we talk about the rules, we'll then do a facilitated discussion on the draft rules. As we have done before, really just focusing in on some final questions that I still have on some pieces that have come up and anything major that anyone else wants to bring up. But at this point, we're kind of working with the rules and no big changes. Then we'll do a break, and then we'll do a roundtable. So that will be an opportunity for every single member of our RAC to have a chance to say something if they would like. You certainly do not have to, but it can be any observations that you've had about this process or the rule or about the topic in a brief fashion for everyone. Then we'll go over the fiscal impact statement and the revisions for that. We'll do a quick discussion on resources to help local governments with the implementation of the rules once they are adopted, if they are adopted. And then we'll finalize with just some closing remarks and adjourn. All right, so I'll remind you all of the timeline real quick before we get into it. So hopefully you can see this okay. We have met as a Rulemaking Advisory Committee a total of 3 times, and today is our 4th. So you can see those dates throughout here. And then in between, we did our rule filing with the Secretary of State on April 1st, and that's when we opened our public comment period. And then we had a hearing with the Land Conservation and Development Commission on April 23rd. And then we had a geographic hearing in Newport on May 4th. So here we are today on May 13th, and our public comment period ends tomorrow at midnight on or 11:55 p.m. on May 14th. And then we'll go back to the Land Conservation and Development Commission to ask them to consider adoption of the rules, and that will be on June 25th, 2026. And that will be in person in Salem or virtual. And then potentially the effective date of the rules would be July 1st of 2027, but that is still up for discussion if people have thoughts on this, and I'll share a little bit of why we picked that date a little bit later on. So just to summarize those public hearings and public comment periods, so we have received no verbal testimony at either of the public hearings, either with the Land Conservation Development Commission or in the geographic hearing. So no verbal testimony has been received. To date, we've received 4 written comments, and those are on our rulemaking website if you want to take a look at those. And like I said, the comment period ends tomorrow, so we still may be getting more comments. And then since we last met in February, we did have 2 webinars for our local government partners where we went over the draft rules and heard feedback from them. So many of the revisions that we talk about today may have come from those webinars, from the comments from all of you, and other discussions that we've had with local governments. Okay, so we'll just put up this slide as a reminder. I think I've put it up every single one of our meetings, and it's just to remind you of what the context is in which we are working and what these rules are from. So this is the implementation requirement number 6 for Goal 17, Coastal Shorelands, which is about coastal public access. And there are really 3 main ideas here. One being that local governments shall develop and implement a program to provide increased public access in coordination with the Parks and Recreation Department, that any existing public access points need to be retained or replaced. And then rights of way can only be vacated to permit redevelopment in coastal areas if they provide coastal access, if the public access across the affected site is retained. So our rules are really kind of touching on these different elements of the existing provision. Okay, so let's see. Did we get Commissioner Thompson back?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm so glad that you made it back. Do you want to say anything before I go further?
Well, if I could just, first of all, be grateful that my technology decided that I was allowed to return to the meeting, so that's always a plus. But for everyone who's here, just really so much appreciation and respect for your thoughtful comments, for your devotion to creating good public policy in Oregon, and really to love and protect our ocean as we look to how we can be more generous and welcoming to everyone. These are noble causes, and I appreciate you, welcome you, and thank you. Thanks, Meg.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it and appreciate your technology working with us. Hopefully it works for everyone today. Okay, so then I just wanted to, I'll go into a few slides now. It'll probably be anywhere from like 10 to 20 minutes to kind of talk through the rule revision. So just bear with me as we get through it all, and then we'll open it up and have discussion on these different sections of the rule. But just to start, just a rule outline, because it has changed since the last time we all met together. The outline has changed. So we have a purpose, policy, definition sections, which are very common for most rules, and so we have those here. We also have an applicability section as well as reporting section, which is new based on local government conversations, a section on rights of way, and then the sort of meaty part of the rules, which is the Coastal Public Access Program. And so I'll go through each of those now. And feel free to put questions as you think of them in the chat. We're not going to stop for questions during this part, just to make sure we get through till we can have more full discussion. But if you have like clarifying things or things you just want to remember to talk about, you are welcome to put it in the chat and we'll get to it later. Okay, so this is where I really need my notes. So I'm going to look at these so I don't forget anything. We have the purpose, policy definitions, and applicability sections. Like I said, these are pretty common sections for all rules, and we have talked about these before. So the purpose is straightforward, which is just to implement, interpret and carry out the requirements of implementation requirement 6 of the goal 17, which we just looked at. Then the policy section was added after discussions with the RAC, which highlighted the importance of the concept of no net loss of coastal public access. So we did add some language around that. However, we had to further revise this section based on DOJ comments because Department of Justice. And that's because the goal doesn't talk about just no net loss. It also talks about a net increase of public access. And really, we think about these as two different concepts. So one is about the increase of access that's related to local government planning. And then the no net loss is related to individual actions for the coastal access sites that already exist. So we did revise language in this section to highlight those two concepts. And we also made some just kind of small edits to the goal to match the goal language more directly. So that's the to and along coastal waters that you might see there. We just revised the words for those sections and not the intention, but just wanted to highlight that. And then we also added some language about replacement of sites. And so some of this policy language is in passive voice, and that's intentional. I just wanted to flag that. This will really help us when we submit these as enforceable policies with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, because as you may know, DLCD has federal consistency authority, and we provide these federal consistency reviews with our enforceable policies of our program, and those have to get approved by NOAA. And ones that are directive of like to the local governments, like local government shall do this, we can't use those as enforceable policies. But we still think these ideas are really important, and so that's why we have them in the policy section as more like passive kinds of voices, because those will make good enforceable policies down the road with NOAA. And if you want to talk more about that, we can talk about that another time, because that's a whole other webinar that we can talk about. Okay, so then the definition section, this is something we've talked about a lot in our discussions. These are to define terms used throughout the rule. We did revise the accessibility component definition, and that was based on our Department of Justice review. We cannot delegate authority with potentially changing standards. So you might remember that our definition back in the maybe when it was first published on April 1st, it had standards that might change in the future, like to reference the most up-to-date accessibility standards. And we can't adopt those because then they're always changing and we can't do things that are changing. They have to be static. So we can reference a specific standard, but what I actually, when I went back through the rule, I realized that the term, how it's used in the rule, it doesn't really need standards for how it's used. So I removed the standards altogether because it doesn't really help with the rule requirements. And so just kept the first part of the definition, and we can talk about that later. And then just wanted to flag, we added one new term, which is coastwide public access database, since that is used throughout the rule. And so it's just referencing the DLCD database that we have. For the applicability section, there were no changes made to this section since the publication on April 1st. This section outlines that the new rule division applies to local governments with identified Goal 17 coastal shorelands. And as a reminder, coastal shorelands are those areas that are immediately adjacent to coastal lakes, estuaries, and the ocean. And there is usually, most local governments have a text-based or map designation of these areas. And then there's one little piece at the end of that section that is talking about how Goal 17 requirements supersede those of Goal 5, where those areas overlap. And so just linking back to an existing rule. Okay, so moving on to the next section. This is the section entitled Reporting. And so this is a new one, and it was added based on our conversations with local government planners. And it's made to kind of be more of a two-way conversation between the local governments and DLCD on what's happening with coastal public access on a more real-time basis. So at first we had this as a reporting requirement for local governments to share with DLCD changes to their coastal public access sites within a 2-year period. We got a lot of feedback from local governments that they wanted it to be more real time and not every 2 years. And part of the reason for that was there was a fear of staff turnover and forgetting what happened in that time period and not having a more connection to that information. So we did change it, and you'll see that reflected in the draft rules in the packet. But we did also get some more feedback recently from local governments that do actually want to have that regular reporting interval and not the more real time like as it's happening, and they want it to be like every year or every 2 years. So it's something that I'd like us to discuss as a group. And the reporting has cities and counties report to DLCD on coastal public access sites have changed under 3 scenarios. So one is that a site has been lost, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. Unintentionally meaning like lost to erosion or flooding or some sort of acute hazard. And then sites that were added. And so in some cases, if they were lost intentionally, they were replaced with another site, or if sites were added because they want to increase their access. And then sites that received improvements like new trails, parking, or accessibility components. Right now, the way this requirement is written is it's for all sites within a local jurisdiction, even if the city or county does not own or manage the site. So for example, if there is a site, a public access site within city limits that is also a state park. And so we did have a comment from local government to make it just that those sites that are within the local government's control and not those that are on state or federal lands or others. So that's another point that I'd like us to discuss today. And then the last part of this reporting is for DLCD to update its own database and to provide instructions for local governments on the notification process. And we did add a provision based on comment that information received by the department can be used to evaluate trends in public access. Okay, so the next section is on rights of way, and this text here on the screen is just a reminder of what already exists in Goal 17. So this is a vacations of rights of way that provide public access, and this is to clarify that existing requirement. We had a lot of discussion around this and back and forth, both within the RAC and with local government partners on the right approach here. And so we've revised the rules to make the vacations a public decision with public notice and a comment opportunity, and to include certain criteria in the decision process. It also requires coordination with the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department if the right-of-way extends onto the ocean shore. And then just recently, you won't see it in your packet because I just made it yesterday, but I added language around coordination with the Department of Transportation if that right-of-way is extends or is part of a state highway system. And we can further discuss this. This was based on comments that we received from ODOT. And then the decision process must be maybe in an existing process. So this new criteria can be added to an existing process that's already existing for the vacation of rights of way, or it can be a new process. And this was sort of a compromised approach that we came up with. You may remember that originally we had this be a quasi-judicial land use decision, and there was a lot of disagreement, I would say, between local governments on whether that was the appropriate approach or not. They can add a lot of extra work around them, and when it becomes a land use decision, it becomes appealable to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, and that can be an expensive and costly process. And so what was really important, I think, was the public notice piece and the transparency of the decision and having a public comment period. So some jurisdictions may choose to make it a quasi-judicial land use decision, and in some cases, some of them already do that. It's already existing in their plans. And then others can continue to have it be a public process that goes with the city council, but they have to address these criteria if it's a coastal public access. And so that is the big change that we have in the rules now. And then the criteria for what it means to retain public access across the affected site is an important part of this, and that it must be identified for public use, provide the same or better access, and owned or managed by a public entity. Again, the criteria was revised a lot throughout the process based on many conversations, particularly with local governments and what is feasible for them. There's also a requirement for state agencies that own or manage rights of way that provide public access to notify the local government before vacating that right of way and after the decision is made on the vacation. We did have placeholder text around replacement sites. There was a lot of discussion on this, and then we decided to take this section out. We do have replacement site criteria as a requirement within the Coastal Public Access Program, which I'll talk about later, but we took it out of this one, this section. And so part of the difficulty of replacement is there's not, for some pieces, not an existing land use nexus related to the loss and replacement of a coastal public access site, and the timing and implementation of replacing an access site can be complex and costly. Local government representatives noted a lack of support from their governing bodies over adding a land use layer to these decisions, and it's been hard to find a one-size-fits-all approach for replacement sites. The reporting part of the rule that we added earlier was kind of added as part of a compromised approach. So the department could receive more real-time information from local governments about coastal public access sites over time. Okay, so those are the pieces of the rule that would apply immediately upon adoption. The second part of the rule is on the Coastal Public Access Program, and this would only be triggered when a local government does a plan amendment process that implicates their coastal public access policies or inventory. So essentially, this is a voluntary plan amendment process. This helps with the capacity issues for our local governments, but we also want to ensure that the requirements we put in here are feasible and doable, because if they're not, then local governments will just choose not to do them. And so we definitely want to make sure that they are achievable. So this is the remaining part of our rule. It's, again, this text on the screen on the left-hand side really talks about, or it just is verbatim, what the goal already requires. And then on the right-hand side is kind of what the program in the rules is talking about. So the program is an inventory and map, plus comprehensive plan policies, plus implementing measures. And so that altogether creates this program. And the local government is really meant to protect, maintain, and increase coastal public access through this program. Increased public access for this rule means adding coastal public access sites beyond what is already inventoried or improving on existing coastal public access sites with amenities such as parking, bathrooms, recreational facilities, accessibility components, or boardwalks. During our local government meetings, we did talk about regional planning for public access. So that would be like a partnership between a local government and state parks to jointly plan for increased access. And I do think that's what the goal is highlighting within its existing text. So I do think this is an important concept. There's nothing in the rules that preclude this from happening. And we can discuss if we want it to be more explicit in this kind of planning. We did add some text to acknowledge this in the part of the rules that describes planning for increased public access, and we can get to that a little bit later. So first is the coastal public access inventory and the requirements around that. So this is to include all the sites within a city or county boundary, regardless of ownership, and that's just for the inventory piece. So again, acknowledging that there are public access sites that might be provided by state parks or federal agencies that are an amenity that the local government is offering. And so those would all be included in the local government's inventory. The starting point for this would be DLCD's decadal public access database, and we acknowledge that this is not always 100% accurate, so it can be augmented as needed. Then there's a requirement for the description of access, which includes whether it's a primary or secondary access site. We've talked about that before, primary being an access site that has some sort of improvement or amenity associated with it, while a secondary access site might be providing access, but not necessarily developed with any sort of trails or features. So that might be more typical of a road end or right of way. It also must describe what kind of access it provides, physical, visual, or both, the ownership and management of the site, and then any amenities or facilities present for those that are primary access points. If the site includes a right-of-way or easement for access, then there must be a map or description of the area that is providing that access. There's also a need to identify how the county or city will improve public access over the time horizon in their comprehensive plan. And that's where we can talk about partnerships and regional planning. Other information can be included as deemed applicable by the city or county. And then on my next slide, I just have an example, which I think I've shown you all before, which is a map from the city of Bandon that they recently adopted that shows their developed and undeveloped access sites. So that's that primary and secondary in their map boundary. And then they also have a table that goes along with that that's within their comprehensive plan. And then the second piece is the access program coordination and implementation. So how do they make this program all work? So first, they have to adopt it into their comprehensive plan, the inventory plus any policies and implementing measures. And they have to minimally address certain topics as part of those implementing policies and measures. And that's what's written here in those bullet points. So public access cannot be blocked, avoid or minimize impacts of access on cultural areas or coastal resources, criteria to replace sites. So again, this flagging that this is where those replacement site criteria live. And that has a few different topics that are in the draft rules. How to increase public access, maintenance planning for the existing sites, primary sites, and then an update timeline, which has to be at least every 10 years to match our decadal inventory updates. There's also parts that we've talked about many times about the coordination with other entities. And so we have tribal governments, state agencies, and others as applicable or relevant. There's a 60-day notification timeframe for those entities so that non-response does not hold up the process. And then finally, there's a requirement for DLCD to update our own database following local adoption so that we have the most up-to-date public access sites as part of our inventory. Okay, So that's the gist of all of the revised rules. I know that's a lot and talked quickly through that all, but we'll move to the Word document shortly. But I did just want to kind of summarize things for us all with this slide, which kind of gives immediate versus long-term impacts of the rule. So like I said, we have decided upon July 1st, 2027 as the rule effective date. And part of the reason for that is that it's about a 6-month following other rules that our department has already adopted that impact local governments, including Goal 5 cultural resource areas, which are going to be in effect on January 1st of 2027. So we want to be cognizant of local government capacity constraints. So on that date, the things that would become immediately required are those decisions on rights of way, if there is a request to vacate those, and they're currently providing coastal public access. The second one would be the reporting. That would be an immediate requirement, whether it's going to be every year, every 2 years, or more ongoing, which we will talk about. And then the third piece, which is the Coastal Public Access Program, that would only be triggered when a plan amendment is initiated that impacts Goal 17 anytime after that July 1st, 2027 date. All right, so I'm going to stop my share for right now and move us to the Word document. Okay. And so just a reminder, we probably won't go through the entirety of the rule, but there are some points that we for sure wanted to discuss with you all and get feedback on. And then if there are other things that people really wanted to talk about, this is your time to do it. So please, if you want to talk about anything in the rule, please either write it in the chat or you can raise your hand. But we can start with the policy section. And if anyone had any thoughts on the overarching policies and the wording on any of those things. I can't really see people, so yeah, if you can raise your hand, that will help me. Yeah, Charlie, go ahead.
Thanks. Appreciate the updates here to the policy section. I wasn't sure if it was intentional. There's a distinction between 1, 2, and 3 where or is used between two or along in two instances, and is used in the other one. I want to make sure that that was intentional, or was that not intentional?
That's a good catch. It's not intentional. It should just match exactly what the goal says.
Yeah, I think it should say and.
Okay.
But you might want to talk internally about that.
Yeah, in the goal it says or. So I will have it be or for now, and then I can flag that as a question for our DOJ. Thanks for flagging that. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on that one? Yeah, Brees, go ahead, please.
I'm just going to keep my camera off. On your policy number 3, and this may just be asking too much, but it says local government shall work with state agencies and other partners. Is because of the sovereign status of tribes, could it be applicable for that to read work with state agencies, tribes, and other partners?
I think that would be totally appropriate. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for catching
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? All right. Well, if you think of anything, please, yeah, go ahead, Arlene.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Sorry, I just lost my screen here. So in the policy in number 5, replacement sites, should match or exceed the quality of the site. So the word quality is used again later, and I suddenly don't have that section handy. Here it is. And I guess, maybe I'll bring it up in the later section. I just want to point out that that word quality is very subjective. And in the section later, in section under, let's see, where is it? Under rights of way, number 4, it comes up again where you're talking about quality of a site, and that's replacing language about access to historical uses, supporting historic uses of a site. So that language about quality of a site is replacing public access that supports historical uses of a site. And so I'm just kind of flagging it now because it's in the policy, but then it comes up again under rights of way.
Yeah. Yeah, that was intentional, and based on lots of conversations with our local government partners. And so, yeah, we wanted to match, first of all, there and here, and then, yeah, that it's somewhat discretionary to accommodate the very different areas of public access along our coast.
Okay, I'll just wait till that section then and bring it up in that, within that context.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll move then on to definitions. If anyone wants to bring up the accessibility component, please let me know. I think we can get back to it based on other parts of the rule, but just flagging that the standards were taken out for kind of 2 reasons. One, that we can't adopt future changing standards, and we could adopt a standard in time right now, but because these rules will be around for a long time and those standards probably will change, and it's not really relevant to the rule requirements, that just having the sort of examples and context is more important for this particular rule. And then I'll kind of go down. Nothing else has changed other than the Coastal Public Access Database, which is just referencing the department's database. Okay, so this was something that ODOT flagged. I don't know, do we have any ODOT representatives here today? I don't see anyone. But they provided some comments on the draft rules and just flagging that sometimes, like especially for road ends and rights of way, that it might not necessarily be a city or county road, but it might be a state highway. And so asking if there was kind of a nexus with having state be more involved in some of these pieces, which I have different thoughts over, I guess, but one piece just to flag is the applicability section is saying that this division applies to all local governments with Goal 17 shorelands. And so it's not necessarily like calling out state agencies as part of the applicability piece. There's coordination requirements, which is really on the local government mostly to coordinate with state agencies and tribes and other partners. But this is really a rule that's focused on local government requirements. So I just wanted to flag that. And so maybe something for you all to keep in mind as we go through other pieces of this. But really, one of my first main questions is on the reporting piece and the mechanism for reporting on local governments, whether it should be an ongoing thing as changes are occurring or something that's like a yearly or every 2-year report. So would love to hear if anyone has thoughts on this, and particularly our local government partners on the RAC, but anyone is welcome to provide feedback on this.
I'll speak for local governments. That makes sense to me when they occur. Um, we have very, very limited staff and already have a lot of reports that we have to do annually or periodically. So I think that language makes sense to me.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Any other thoughts on this reporting section before I move on to rights of way? Cool. Thanks, Wendy. Appreciate that. Okay. So then for the rights of way, I'll flag that we have changed this again. I mentioned this before, from a quasi-judicial land use decision to a public decision, and that how they implement that is up to the local jurisdiction, but they must meet these sort of minimum requirements if that right of way also provides coastal public access. And so we have added what that public notice must include. So at least 2 of the following, and listed different ways of getting that information out there. And then I did add that new piece, which is that if it's adjacent to a state highway, the local government must coordinate with the Oregon Department of Transportation. The local government's not going to be able to vacate a state highway anyway, right? That's going to be within the jurisdiction of the state, but if there's something that's like connecting it, there was potentially some flagging of like how those connections could integrate into the other connections for coastal access. So just recognizing that the system is bigger than just one particular access site. So how do people feel about that addition with Department of Transportation?
Looks good to me.
It makes sense.
Cool. Thanks. Mary, go ahead.
Oh, it seems a little like duplicative. If we already need to do that, I don't really see why we build it into the rule.
Do you mean like because you have to do it anyway through the
Exactly.
statute? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that's a good point. I'll just make a note of that. Thank you. And the public notice, and then the next part, number 3, kind of talks about, sorry that it's on 2 pages, but maybe I'll put this up. No, it's not working. Okay. So again, referencing, so like kind of what Mary was just saying, like there's this ORS Chapter 271, which already has criteria for the vacation of rights of way that local governments have to follow, and as well as state agencies. And so this would be in addition to that, that these additional criteria need to be met in order for that decision to be approved. And so that they can include this decision process within their municipal code, zoning code, or other applicable ordinance, or they can apply the criteria directly to an existing decision process. So for our local government partners out there, how's that feel? Because that was basically, we're trying to have like a compromise approach of like not requiring it to be a land use decision, but also having it be a public decision. I see a thumbs up. Okay, that's good. Anyone have any like things they'd like to see clarified in this piece? See other their hand thumbs up. Great. Yeah, Brace, go ahead.
I realize this is going to be pedantic, so bear with me. Should this actually say that this decision process must be developed prior to, so that there isn't a, well, we will adopt an interim or a temporary something, action prior to the development of a process. That's where that's coming from. So it's a clarification, and I'm only bringing it up because I've had a situation elsewhere where it didn't specify that this had to. Logic says X, but paper says doesn't have to be that. So that's where this is coming from. I apologize, everybody.
This is where the time to make those comments. So appreciate it. Just gonna note that for myself. Yeah, Gail, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so if we change it to prior to, is that going to be putting a local government in a position where they're now reacting to an application and now we're just kind of moving a goalpost or putting in a goalpost where previously there was no goalpost? I'm just a little concerned that the only reason a government is going to do this is now because they have an application on their desk, and now they're going to put the applicant on hold and say, well, we can't process your application because we don't have a process.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that when this rule becomes effective, you will have to develop that. You'll have to put this in your process, or just have the ability to apply the criteria directly. So you're right, like probably not saying prior to, it should really say whatever I had before, I can't remember. But does that make sense to you, Gail?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, but the way that this reads to me, I would interpret it that if we didn't have a process, now I have to establish a formal process, and I'm probably not going to do that till I get an application because we're just not going to have time.
So do you like for or prior to or neither?
Sorry, my computer wants to restart and do updates.
Uh-oh.
I would support for,
Okay.
but I mean it's not a deal breaker for me, whatever is the consensus of the group.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. It's good perspective. Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on that one?
I'll just say that I kind of share a similar concern as Brees, where processes are created based on applications, and that can create um, political influence on how the process is actually created, based on the need versus a predetermined process that others are aware of. So, as an individual that would learn about that and be trying to find out about that, and not being on the processing end, I do feel like there's a little bit of a gap there. I'm challenged. I've had several situations where it wasn't clear what the process was, and they created the process for a specific permit request in a different land use context. And I can imagine that being complicated. So one way or the other, I think it should just be clear to the public too.
Yeah, for sure on that end. I will just note that this is an existing requirement, so we're not changing the requirement at all. It should be there already. And then there is a very clear existing process for the vacation of rights of way. What's changing is just the criteria and where it potentially lives. So to Charlie's point, like for sure it needs to be clear to the public. So I agree with that. And what is being proposed as a criteria is fairly clear and objective. I mean, there is some discretion in it for sure. But all the other pieces of a vacation request are in statute.
Got it.
Laurel, go ahead.
I just have a question about the next sentence that's talking about the criteria, because it's pointing to the process having those criteria as set forth in 4A to E and I read that as being about the process, but is that 4A through E below there? Is that the part about
this part.
the quality or about the access?
Yeah,
so I read
but the
those as
decision
being
process must include those criteria, and the criteria are those ones that are provided in A to E.
Okay, so I see those as criteria for the access, not for the process. So it's not about the process then.
Well, that they have to create a process to process the application, and that process needs to include those criteria in the decision-making process.
Okay.
Okay, so we can go on to the next part, which is the criteria. And as I mentioned, it has changed a bit. And again, this was through a lot of conversations with local governments and the flexibility that they would like to have with creating a replacement site, and that they all have very different contexts in which they have access. So thinking like Reedsport versus Dune City versus Seaside, these places are very different. And so want to make sure that this works for all. And so having the criteria be clearly identified for public use, everyone's pretty on board with that one. Matches or exceeds the quality of the existing access, so getting at this like for like or better. And then owned or managed by a public entity. And then if applicable, so only if applicable, retains the connection to the Oregon Coast Trail or other known trail network. And if those criteria cannot be met, then they shall deny the vacation request. So any final thoughts on that one? Arlene, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so this is the one I was mentioning earlier. So access across the affected site means the point of entry leads to that same segment of beach, let's say, as it did before. It doesn't mean that, access isn't redirected over a cliff that leads to a different segment of beach. It means, as I understand it, it's meant to say that that any new access would allow you to access that same piece of beach. Let's say, am I understanding that point correctly?
Potentially.
When you say affected site, right? Because if so, then matches or exceeds the quality of the existing access means that the new access site must be created so that it leads to that same segment of beach. I guess I feel like that's an important point to make clear if that's the correct interpretation, or if it's not implied at all, if it's not intended to be implied, then perhaps we should talk about that, and maybe it should be, because the previous statement that we all reviewed and commented on was that it provides equivalent access and supports historic uses of the site. And that historic use, from my perspective, could be fishing access. If you were changing the access to a beach and you could no longer access that beach, but you can access the beach on the other side of that bluff, that's a very different thing. So the devil's in the detail of how you use these words and what you mean by quality. Quality is a very, very open-ended word. It really doesn't mean anything unless you define it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the point, is to be providing flexibility while also providing some sideboards. So yeah, I think there was a lot to this one. But if you have suggested edits, we can consider those. But I think that's, yeah, kind of where we've landed with this one.
Well, and maybe an example would be like a housing development that, is pretty extensive along a coastal beach, and now that public access that was previously available for beach access is now not available, until you're on, like I said, the other side of a bluff or something. To me, that's a little bit of a slippery slope to not be intentional here. I think the language as it was pretty clear. Supporting historical use at that site is very clear, so that you're not taking away what was a public right and public access, such as fishing or tide pooling or tribal activities or anything else.
I will just remind you, though, that this will be a public process with public comment opportunity. So those would be great times for the public to like weigh in and be like, no, actually, we use this for surfing all the time, and there's no other place nearby, and your replacement is not correct. And so then they would, deny the request if that can't be met. Yeah, Laurel, go ahead.
Yeah.
If it's not in the criteria, it would be up to the public or user groups to be advocating for their interest then, if it's not clearly outlined and it's not
Or
clear
say
what we're
like it doesn't match or exceed the quality. Yeah.
I don't understand what that means. Like, if I read match or exceed the quality of the existing access, that would be hard for me to implement. That wouldn't be me, it would be the local government. So I'm just curious if what the discussion was about these particular items that were in item B that I thought we generally as a RAC had good consensus around. But in this version, they're removed and it just says quality of the existing access, which allows lots of flexibility, which could end up being fine. But it also is generally vague. So I agree with Arlene about that I would find it difficult to implement that sentence. So I'm just curious if there's folks that could explain what the concerns were about the more specific language.
Yeah, there was a lot of concern around like, what does historic use mean? And like, so if it was like along an estuary and part of it was vacated and it's like really just never even used for access, but then another place somewhere like that's not the same site but is on the same water body but like in a different location but is actually a better access because it's safer and all those things, like that would be okay. And so there's actually like a benefit happening in that case, and that has happened in like the city of North Bend as an example, where this has come up. So I think that was part of it, is like trying to have some flexibility to allow these things to happen, even if it's not like in the exact way that we might think about it happening. So that's why we're trying to come up with some different language. Brees, go ahead.
Yeah, my question kind of is similar to Laurel's about, why and why those have been changed. And I'm hearing your answer. But to that point, because I do think that words like quality get a little too squishy when decisions need to be made. So is there room in this then for something like a 4.B.1 that says guiding considerations for evaluative are access to commensurate areas or commensurate activities? Give some bounded edges to what that potential qualitative element is. It's not wholly binding necessarily, because I agree, purpose and function change over time. But I do think that there is a risk that suddenly there's no forward without something to give a nudge in that direction. So that's just for consideration.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Charlie, go ahead.
I think Brees actually articulated that well, better than than I could have, more better. But just yeah, representing user groups with specific interest and specific uses, and also understanding that those things change over time. I do think that this is the crux of where challenges will come in vacating and what is being lost or potentially gained. So somehow putting some boundaries on this, I agree, while leaving that flexibility, I think is important. So I don't think I've resolved anything for you here other than agreed with Brees.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can work on some alternative language to see if we can find some middle ground. Okay. So I think what we'll do is do a couple more main points for the Coastal Public Access Program, which is the next section. And then we'll take a break and then come back for the rest of the agenda. But Arlene, go ahead.
Yeah, you skipped over 5, the last one. And I just had a comment about that, more of a question. So this specifically says state agencies.
Mhm.
Thinking of Whale Cove as a federal agency, Fish and Wildlife Service, managing the land and the access to that point. I just wanted to draw attention to that. I don't know if that's the only spot on the coast, but it occurred to me that if it's, appropriate to do so, you may want to say state or federal agency.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll be able to, but I can ask our DOJ.
Yeah, just wanted to flag that. Not that that's a particularly great place for the public to climb down that long ladder down the cliff. We do for survey work, but it just made me think of that. So just wanted to flag it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the Coastal Public Access Program. This first part is not, it looks like it's been changed, but it's not changing anything in its meaning. This is just based on comments from our Department of Justice to make this section more clear as to when these requirements are triggered. And so again, this is when the local government is doing a voluntary plan amendment that is going to impact their coastal public access inventory, the associated maps, and related comprehensive plan policies or related implementing measures. And when that occurs, they have to apply the rest of the rules, basically section 2, which is below, and then the rest of these rules as we'll get to them. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to mention is that regional planning idea that I kind of briefly went over in our opening slides. So the idea that we've been talking about increased access as adding sites that are above what's existing and then also improving existing sites. And adding new sites might be really difficult for a local government to do on their own or within even their own boundaries, but they could work regionally with other local governments or with state parks or with federal agencies to think about access and how they can increase that access over time. And so just wanted to kind of flag that and see how people feel about that. And if there, again, like I said, there's nothing that precludes that from happening already and even encourages that to some extent. But if there's any sort of clarifying language that we want to put in that kind of gets to that regional planning idea. So here I have putting it in the inventory of coastal public access sites. which has to include a description of potential future amenities, improvements, facilities, partnerships as an addition, or additions anticipated for how the city or county will seek to increase coastal public access over the time horizon in the comp plan. Plans for increasing access can include identifying partnerships and regional planning with other entities, such as other public land managers. So how do people feel about that? All right, hearing nothing, I'll take that as consensus. We'll move on. Arlene, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's just more of a general comment. You know, I guess, I mean, a lot of this has changed considerably from the draft that as a group, as an advisory committee, we reviewed in February. This is comparing it to what was, what came out of your process with a meeting outside of this process or meetings outside of this process. So without like going back and like comparing this to what we spent a lot of time on reviewing and commenting on previously, it's a little, I feel a little bit in the dark myself about just what's missing, what was changed from where we landed after, RAC meeting number 3. So in terms of coordination, like with the state agencies on certain things and what some of those desired elements were about reducing impact or, at least coordinating on what those resource impacts might be or might not be or whatever, it's hard to know what's missing and what's improved. I'm glad to see that it's reduced in size and that it's maybe more succinct, but yet I also don't have a good feel for what's changed from the last version. It looks like a lot has been removed or reorganized or reworded. So, yeah, so, I guess my lack of comment isn't necessarily that I totally agree with everything. I just don't know what's changed.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said from the beginning. It's from the April 1st draft is the comparison. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of process that has gone on. So, and again, this group is not seeking consensus. We're just taking feedback. And ultimately, it's our staff recommendations that go to our commission. And it is part of the RAC packet, and you had a week to look at it. And so it's really up to every individual member to spend time reading through everything and on your own time and then coming to these meetings to discuss. And so,
Well, I've been
I
gone all
appreciate
week,
that
so yeah,
everyone has
I
busy
appreciate what you're
schedules. So,
saying.
yeah.
I've been gone all week. I just got back last night, so having a week to review a lot of material is not a whole lot of time, given many of us work full time and all of that. But yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Don.
Hey, Meg, I just wanted to clarify. It seems like we're really talking about two different inventories. One is the statewide inventory database, but then you're also requesting that each locality create their own inventory. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And this set of rules doesn't really prescribe how those two are going to play well together or not. Is that correct?
No, I mean, I think the DLCD database is set up for, our own purpose. And then it's part of a framework data set, which like you might be, I'm sure, very familiar with. And there are other partners that contribute to that, and it's used for very different purposes. And that's kind of outside of this rulemaking, because what we're talking about with local governments is for their comprehensive plans, which are not necessarily like on a viewer somewhere for everyone to look at. It's part of a static document that's probably a PDF, right? And like our whole land use planning system is based on inventories. Like that's how the whole system is based, and all the policies are built upon that. So every local government is required to do inventories for all parts of their comprehensive planning. And so this is just one small part of that. And so the purpose of their inventory is different than the purpose of our inventory and the purpose of other agencies contributing to that inventory. So they will be managed differently. And but the kind of benefit that would come from this with the reporting aspect is that more continual talking to each other than we have now. Because right now DLCD does an inventory every 10 years, and that's a long time. And so a lot can change in that 10-year period. And so when you have these sites that are changing more frequently, they're then going to report that to DLCD, and we'll be able to ingest that into our database and update it right away. And so it will reflect more real world decisions and things that are on a platform that can be seen from different people. So that's kind of how they'll work together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, not ideal, but I see how that works. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Arlene, did you raise your hand again, or is that a residual hand? Okay. Okay. Let's see. I think one thing I wanted to bring up with the group is that we had two different sections for the program, which is that the local government has to implement their plan with different comprehensive plan policies that address different topic areas. And those are listed here in 4A through EF. Yeah. And so they're about preventing public access sites from being blocked, methods to avoid or minimize impacts, replacing sites, strategies to increase public access, maintenance plan, and a process to update the program at least every 10 years, but more frequently if they decide to. And so those are the required policies. So it's not saying what the policies would be, it's saying what the policies have to address, and it's up to each local government to customize those policies. And we actually have model comprehensive plan policies that we developed as part of that local government handbook, guidebook that we developed a couple years ago. And Clatsop County is a great example of doing exactly that, where they have adopted an inventory into their comprehensive plan and comprehensive plan policies using our model policies, but customizing them for their own use. The city of Bandon did that as well, and now we have Manzanita and Seaside are working on similar efforts right now. So kind of putting into place what these rules would require anyway. And so that's really good to see. But then we have this next section, number 5, which is on additional considerations. So they don't have to address these, but they can, and they can consider these other topics. And so these would be including impacts from coastal hazards on coastal public access sites, on potential development or redevelopment of the areas that might impact coastal public access, new development projects like subdivisions or hotels where current access is currently lacking to have public access as part of that development project, new or improving existing coastal access to include accessibility components. And then a new one that I added was any new publicly funded projects within coastal shorelands to include adding or improving public access as part of those projects. So again, these are considerations, not requirements. But we did have, and Charlie, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Charlie and Oregon Shores did a joint letter. And so they asked about moving these two, A and B, up from the considerations into the requirements. And so I wanted to bring that up for discussion with the group and see what people think about that, and particularly our local government partners to feel how they feel about the feasibility of those things. And Charlie, please say if I got any of that wrong.
No, that's accurate. I think it's better to hear how the local governments feel about it.
Thank you.
I don't know that we put this in our letter. I did think it was important to make a distinction between acute and chronic hazards. is that what you may be doing and planning in those spaces look very, very different, and it might just be worth having a distinction between those two. But I'd be interested to hear from the government folks here, local government planners.
All right. Well, let us know if you have any thoughts on that one. And I appreciate that comment, Charlie, about chronic versus acute, because chronic are probably a little bit easier to plan for, acute not so much. So
Exactly. I do think we had some sea level rise, climate change language as well that we recommended, but we don't have to bicker over those words.
yeah, I mean, it's just a bad time for us on that word right now.
I understand. I understand that it's more of a defensive strategy to keep that language in.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, well, we can keep talking about that one or thinking about that one. And then we have our coordination, which I think we've had very robust discussion on in the past meetings, and nothing has changed here from those meetings. So we still have all of our agencies listed out, tribes with the list from the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, and then any other applicable state agencies, federal agencies, special districts, or neighboring local governments on the development of this local access plan. Again, we had comment from ODOT, but they really were only interested in it when it came to like adjacency with state highways. And so I think kind of to the point Mary made earlier of like, you know, there's some requirements there are already for notification and coordination, and so we don't need to be duplicative, and they're already covered under any other applicable state agency. So if they don't always want to be notified for everything, then they can be kind of in that bucket of other state agencies. So just wanted to highlight that. And then there was one other comment from the DLCD side of things of updating our database, that we would do it within 1 year. And they were saying, like, could we do that faster? And it's probably possible for us to do that faster. So I said as soon as possible, but no later than 6 months from receiving the post-acknowledgement plan amendment adoption notice, which is just a process part for us. That's how we receive those plan amendments from local governments. So we get that notification. So I think those were my biggest questions and things for additional feedback. Like I said, we've gone through a lot of different iterations with different groups and have had this public comment period open. And so at this point, we're not really looking for big changes, but just small adjustments and making things implementable and clear. So I'm going to stop sharing, but if anyone wants to go back to any part of that or have just overarching questions or thoughts before we take a break, please go ahead. Yeah, and I'll just reiterate what Lisa said in the chat, that back to talking about the inventory, the state inventory is really the basis for the local government inventory so that they don't have to start from zero. So that's a really important part of that database. Okay, well, let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 2:32, and we'll go into our roundtable. So over the break, be thinking about if you want to share anything. You definitely do not have to, but every person will be offered an option to speak about, and you can talk about the rule, coastal access, the process of the rack, anything that you want to share. It's just kind of your time to share with the group. We won't really be responding, just taking notes for that. And then, but because there's a good group of us here, about 1 minute per person, so that we have time for everyone and can still get to the rest of our agenda. So we'll come back at 2:32. Thank you. All right, if you could put your cameras on if you're able to, if you're back, just so I know people are back at their computers. Awesome, thank you. And if you can just stay on camera for this portion of the agenda, that would be appreciated. I understand if you are not able to, but to the extent you can, please stay on camera. Okay, so like I said before the break, we are going to do a roundtable, and this is something that other RACs have done recently at DLCD, so that is why we're going to give it a try here as well. So again, everyone will be offered an opportunity to speak, but you don't have to, and you can kind of speak to anything that you would like to share, either about the rules specifically, about the topic, about the RAC process, about your participation and your affiliation or anything like that. So I'll just call on people to share. And I think I'm going to pick on Charlie first, if you don't mind. And again, if you don't want to, just say pass. And if we have time at the end, if anyone wants to respond to anything that anyone else said, we'll have an opportunity for that as well. But just kind of an open forum to share and provide feedback or thoughts with the whole group.
Like, were you wide open on this? You just want me to share like how I'm feeling emotionally vulnerable at this moment in time?
Yes. Yeah.
It's the first person to go.
I know. I'm sorry to pick on you.
No, it's fine. I appreciate the process that we've had here. I honestly have been part of a number of different rulemaking efforts over the years, and it's a bit of a moving target. I feel like our process for rulemaking changes from one agency to another agency, or when big changes happen within the structure of agencies, I guess. And so this one, I don't know, this has felt good for me. I felt like the cadence of these was nicely laid out. I've had some others that have been pretty jammed up recently, and some communications that have been hard to track. And I felt like the things that we asked for were heard in this process. And so Surfrider spent a lot of time trying and had some resources for reviewing and engaging that maybe others don't have the privilege of having that capacity and time. But um, I appreciated being able to like kind of formalize comments in between meetings and track really what we were engaging with. So overall, I feel good about this product and where we're at. I did have some concerns. I'm not going to say along the way, particularly around the no net loss stuff, that we could have really been shooting ourselves in the foot here. And I felt like we course corrected well on that. So overall, that's how I'm feeling. Is that good?
That's great. Thank you so much. It's a great example for others, but yeah, but also everyone can feel free to share differently. Okay, so I'm going to go with Margaret because I can see you up next on my screen. I'm sorry to pick on you too.
Thanks. I don't have a lot to say. I guess I would say just I appreciated being, included in this process and thought communications were pretty clear. I maybe have some concern about maintaining access to particular places through this process, but I understand that would be worked out in the public process in the community level. So that makes sense to me. Other than that, no, I think it was a nice job. I appreciate the spirit of the group, and yeah, just appreciate the land trust point of view being included in the process. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Scott.
Okay, my turn. This is the first rulemaking committee I've been involved with. I think it was overall a good experience. The timing was really interesting because I'm helping both Manzanita and Seaside with their comprehensive plan update right now. So we're dealing with a lot of these, preemptively trying to implement some of these rules now in those comp plan updates. And I just wanted to point out that, you know, in doing the inventory, I had some concerns early on that we were putting too much on the cities to do that. But, you know, if you're doing a comp plan update, it's really not that much effort. It's just it's one of those things, one of those boxes you have to check when you're doing those updates. So we were able to start with the statewide inventory for our access, update that map locally. We'll then provide that data back to the state so that that inventory can be updated with the same data that for example, Seaside and Manzanita are using, and then kind of developing that list of items that are in that access point. So I think that was good to kind of try and use some of these things in that process. At the same time, we're looking at some of the rulemaking. The other thing I would mention is we did borrow and use some of the model policies for the comp plan, which is also super helpful. And I think, you know, we've had good support from Meg and her team at DLCD with using those resources and tools, and trying to kind of implement the rulemaking as it's happening. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Scott. Yeah, it's nice to see it happening in real time before the rules are even adopted. So it's exciting. Okay, Brees, I see you.
Sorry, technology. Yeah. I want to echo everything that has been said previously, so I won't say it. I have appreciated coming into this collective, you know, kind of hive mind, and with, you know, and as a representative of a tribe, and how there is room for that inclusion in this, and that those concerns that tribes have are being recognized. So I want to thank the commissioner for the support, as well as yours and everybody within the agency that's, you know, making that happen. That, you know, 10 years ago, that was a much more rare moment. So I just wanted to call attention to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. Okay, Adam. Adam, are you there? Maybe not. How about Wendy?
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a working camera at this location. This is my first chance to serve on a committee at this level. When I saw the opportunity, I reached out to people that are more involved on the planning side, and didn't get any takers. So I'm really just trying to, it seems like the Southern Coast and Brookings in particular hasn't really been at the table for a lot of these things. So I was excited to be invited to serve. I'm not sure how much I had to offer, but I really want to thank the DLCD staff and the RAC members for all the work that they put into this process. Serving on the committee gave me a much better understanding of Goal 17, the importance of protecting public access on the coast, and it really made me realize in some of the discussions that Brookings has a really unique perspective, because much of our shoreline is made up of cliffs. So that really naturally limits our beach access opportunities. But I appreciate that the revised draft recognizes the need for flexibility, coordination, practical implementation for smaller jurisdictions like ours, that we're actually about ready to have our one planner retire. So anybody who's looking for a job or knows anybody that might want to serve in that capacity down in Brookings. So overall, I think this process really helped clarify local government responsibilities, and strengthened that shared understanding of coastal public access across agencies and communities like ours. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate it. Okay, Phil with the Marine Board. I know you weren't part of most of the meetings, but I'll give you an opportunity to speak if you'd like.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. No, I don't have any additional comments. I'm just here filling in for Alan, and we didn't have additional anything else to add.
Great, thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. I will just say for everyone that Alan did email me and say he looked at the rules and he felt comfortable with that from the Marine Board's perspective. So good to hear that. Laurel.
Sorry, it wouldn't unmute or turn my camera on. I don't have anything to add. I will say, I think for future racks, and I've done this for other ones over the last 20 years, maybe having a pre-meeting with multiple state agencies could avoid some of the back and forth we had to do one-on-one with state agencies, like a joint state agency meeting ahead of time might be valuable. I know we had good one-on-one conversations, but bringing in Marine Board and ODFW might have been helpful, or might be helpful in the future. It has worked for other racks or rulemaking processes, not racks.
Great, thank you. Arlene.
Sorry, I don't have a camera today. Yeah, I would echo Laurel's comment about, maybe having a state-to-state agency discussion in advance might be more efficient and useful for our participation in the process. Otherwise, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. And Don?
Hey, everybody. Well, I think mostly I'm thankful for the opportunity to kind of peek into this process. Boy, our rules and statutes seem like they're much more prescriptive. So it's a good glimpse into, how this work gets done. And what I do know are beaches and shorelines, and have always enjoyed how well Oregon has always protected them. And I don't see any changes coming on that front. If anything, this is going to make all of that stronger, which, from my standpoint, helps with habitat protection and public safety and just general public and everyone's enjoyment of the coast. So applaud the effort, and glad I got to get a glimpse into that. I wish I could have been a little more productive in the helping shape it, but I think we're all better off that I'm not. We would not want these things managed at the parts per million level. So thank you.
Thank you. I think I got all of the RAC members. Did I miss anyone? Okay, so Commissioner Thompson, would you like to share anything?
Well, ocean work is the best work, just flat out. It's the source of life, and I would say the character of the people involved have informed the process so that it's technically good, but looking at the intelligence and the spirit that informs this work, I think going forward, we'll all do better. So I love a good policy and a budget, get goosebumps from the nerdy stuff. But when we have this kind of communication and we understand the impact and why it matters, that's the best. I loved it. I'm just so happy I got the chance to be with you. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thanks, everyone. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to share on that. I know it's not easy, especially if you don't know everyone in the room. And you can see that we come from very different backgrounds and expertise, which is why we're all part of this process together, and that helps inform those rules and see it from different perspectives. And at the end of the day, it is a rule for local government implementation, and so that's why we really center those perspectives and try to make it so that is implementable on their level. So thank you for participating. Okay, so our next agenda item is to talk about some of the more boring things. So I apologize, but we'll try to get through them so that we can get you out maybe even a little early today. So the next piece will be about our impact statements. And so you might remember that we worked with a consultant to draft the required impact statements for the rules, and there are 3 different impact statements. There's racial equity, housing, and fiscal. For the racial equity and the housing, there was really no impact for those areas, and so we're not going to discuss them further today, but there is a fiscal impact, mostly for local governments, but a little bit for state agencies and for tribes. And not really on the public side, but impact in sort of a beneficial way, hopefully over time with increased access, and the same for small businesses. So I will share that screen to show you kind of where we are for that. And we don't have to go through nitty-gritty stuff unless you want to. As Commissioner Thompson said, that's what gives her goosebumps, so maybe we'll do it. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of share, this is not the entirety of the document because there's a lot of like just context and like required language that I took out so that we could really just focus on the main text for this purpose. And so let me just scroll. Here we go. So we have to assess the expected degree to which state agencies, units of local government, tribes, and the public may be economically affected by the adoption of the rule. And so there's some just like background text that is not really part of the impact statement, but just setting the stage. And so we can update that as we need to. But then the actual like impacts are kind of listed here, although I did want to just flag one thing. So there's a statement that there will be limited review and comment time for agencies providing review and feedback. And this is talking about when there's the coordination between different entities with local governments when they're developing the public access program. And that's actually not true. So I'm going to fix that because the limited time frame is just to ask those entities to engage in the process. It's not a time frame for how long they have to engage. That could be much longer than the 60 days, which is that's just provided to start the coordination. So I'm going to fix that. But then going back to most of the impacts, so I tried to list those out and make some changes to what was, and again, this is changes since April 1st when we filed our Secretary of State notice for the rules. So these are like the main pieces of fiscal impacts that we expect. So we have cost of the reporting, cost of the vacation of rights of way decision process, and then the completion of the full Coastal Public Access Program, which is linked to that plan amendment process. And then the coordination of that. So those are pretty much the main pieces that are requirements and then have some sort of fiscal impact. Is there anyone who thinks that there's something missing from this? Like there's an impact, a fiscal impact to a local government, a tribe, or a state agency beyond those 3 main buckets? Okay, well, I'm going to move on then. And then really it's just a little bit of text on small and large businesses, just saying that there could be some impacts from the rule for specific businesses, like if one access way went away or another one became added, those could have local impacts to businesses and visitors. But then going into local governments, they have to notify DLCD They have to add that new decision criteria for the vacation of rights of way, and then when triggered, a compliant coastal public access program. So that's kind of what Scott was just talking about that he's doing with Seaside and Manzanita, the cost of that development of that program. So those are, again, the main costs. So I think that's all covered pretty well. And that can be outreach and coordination, the inventory itself, the implementation language. Then there's some costs that go beyond just developing the program itself, like maintenance plans for primary access sites, regularly updating the program and coordinating with us and then also the other entities. So just kind of reiterating that. Yeah, Breeze, go ahead.
I'm not sure where this fits in the, and I'm going to wear my tribal rep hat here. When there's a lot of reliance on fiscal, and I get that because you have to, but is there a way of putting an asterisk in there because a tribal cultural value may be inappropriately measured by dollars? Meaning you have a community, for instance, that is wanting to bring greater access. I'm going to pick on surfing for no reason, but the access point that had been utilized for decades is no longer available for whatever reason. There's a need to bring in a new one. The new one, the shortest distance and the greatest ease of access, is right through an archaeological site, or a plant gathering area, or a space of greater cultural significance. How do those values, the cultural, social values of that place, weigh into or in balance with fiscal costs? And if it can't be done, it can't be. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that would be really happening when the local government is developing that public access program and putting in policies to address exactly what you said, which would be required. So like, how do they balance the need for access with the protection of cultural resources or coastal natural resources? And that would really be in that policy development. This part, the impact statement, is really about how the making of those rules is impacting them and also the tribes, because like the tribes are listed as a coordinating body. So there would be an impact of your time, right? Or like, or others in that review. And I think we did add that in.
I think it's down below. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Because I know we talked about that last time, so I want to make sure that that was adequately captured. But yes, I think that's a great point.
And great. I hear not here, elsewhere.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's good. Good question. Because I think it helps to raise that point of like, I'm doing this stuff all the time, right? And it's not what you all are doing all the time. So it's good to remember that it's good to have more explanation sometimes of what we're doing. I think that's probably like the biggest things. I don't know if other people just want to make sure, like we really want to make sure this impact is included in these impact statements. You know, like there's a lot around local governments and their time that it would take to do an inventory, to develop those policies, to do the public engagement and the engagement with tribes and with agencies, and then the cost to adopt it, and then anything following up with that, which could be significant, you know, like depending on if they do add access points over time, like that could be a big cost, right? With like land acquisition or permits for improvements and infrastructure costs and things like that. So those could be significant, but they would be over a larger time horizon than immediately. For state agencies, it would really be around that coordination. So participating kind of in a similar way as participating on this rulemaking advisory committee with local governments and developing those policies and the inventory. And then the same for the tribal governments, like making sure the right staff are involved and getting notices with the local government and working on those policies. So that's kind of the main gist of this document. It is a lot of words, so I know it's a lot to look on the screen. I'm sorry. But Laurel, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I'm not trying to add more words, but I wonder where you say just the other state agencies, whether it makes sense, because there are certain ones that are called out specifically in the rules, whether it makes sense to call those out in this, since it's likely that certain ones would have more impact than others if they're required to do regular coordination.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Okay, I was looking for the word in this pile of words. Okay, thank you. Okay. And yes, I think, Dawn, it sounds like your question was answered. I was just checking the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna stop that one because I think we've gotten through the gist of that. And I'll just mention that we'll be finalizing the rule language based on input. And then of course, any public comments that we receive as of tomorrow. And then that will be sent to our consultant one more time for one more draft of the fiscal impact statement, but it probably won't change dramatically, but just in the exact requirements and those kind of things, mostly around the local government impacts. And then I'll share the edits that I've already been working on with him. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint. We just have a couple more things to hit today, and then we will wrap it up. Okay, so the last piece that I wanted to discuss with you all is the local government implementation. So let's pretend it's June and we've adopted the rules and in somewhat of the format you just saw with some tweaks, and then they come into effect on July 1st of 2027. What do we need to help our local government partners be able to implement these rules? And so we've been thinking about this and have some ideas. But we would like to hear from others too of like, how do we build the resources and the tools needed to make sure this implementation goes well for our partners? And so we've already talked about a couple of them. It's the inventory that DLCD maintains. It's the model policies that we've already developed for comprehensive plans. And the whole guidebook, which also includes recommendations for tribal engagement and other things like that. So there's already those resources. We'll probably want to update the guidebook when the rules are adopted with the language from the rules. There is other things that we could do, like webinars. We could do have some model language for the decision criteria for the vacations of rights of way. So those are some things that I'm thinking about, but would love to hear what other people think we need to make sure this goes well into the future. Any thoughts?
I like the webinars, and if you can record those and have those accessible, I really get a lot out of webinars, and I know that we're going to have some new staff coming on. So, yeah, that one sounds like a great addition to getting our local governments on board.
That's awesome. Thank you, Lindy. Yeah, that's definitely something we can plan for. Anyone else? We'll also do instructions on the reporting. I didn't mention that yet, but for how we'll make a form for local governments to fill out and a method for that to connect with our database so that the data gets updated quickly. I've already talked to our web guru about that, Tanya Haddad, as some of you may know her, but we've been talking about different options for that reporting mechanism. All right, well, we don't have to stay on this too long. But if you think of anything that you need or would like to see us do, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I think then we're in the home stretch. So just to share this timeline one more time with you all to remind you that the public comment period ends tomorrow. And then we'll be going to our commission on June 25th of 2026 to ask for their adoption. The public hearing has already taken place, so I don't think they're going to take comments on it at the meeting, although sometimes they do that, but I don't think we can plan on that. So I would just, know that that's not, there's always a public comment opportunity on our LCDC agendas for just general items. So I'll just flag that. But on this item, the public comment or the public hearing has closed. Charlie, go ahead.
I was just curious, you briefly touched on no verbal comment. I was curious if anybody attended the public hearings. No, nobody.
No, nobody did. Yeah, it was interesting. And I guess I should say it's a good point. For the written comments, I mean, Charlie, you've already offered that you submitted comments with Oregon Shores, and so that's one of the ones we've received. And then we got some from individual homeowners along the coast who had some public comments as well. Some of them were kind of really big ideas that are probably not something we can address with these rules alone, like just the fact that sea level rise and the tsunami will kind of get rid of beaches altogether, and so that we need to plan for that, which is a very good point. And then one about the potential negative impact of more coastal access on people who live near public accesses. So that was another comment that we received.
I didn't understand that comment, the Starfish Cove one. Knowing the area, I had a hard time understanding that one.
Yeah, that's good feedback because I don't know that area very well. So it's good to hear that. So yeah, that was the extent of it. So thank you, Charlie, for pointing that out because I don't think I talked about that yet. Okay. Any other questions about the timeline or the next steps? Yeah, Arlene, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm unclear about, so there were some comments today about maybe suggested revisions in a few spots, a few minor things. How are those going to be incorporated prior to, because I just see, right now it's still a public comment period, but I don't see another spot on your timeline for an updated version.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's the role of the RAC is pretty much over after this meeting. So then it's really just up to us to incorporate the feedback we've received so far from you all, as well as the written public comments and other local governments that we've engaged with. And so we'll make our best recommendation for the rule and present that to our commission, and then they will vote on it. And they it's in their authority to, they can still change things in the rule on the day that they're voting on things. So that's a possibility that it could still change up until that day under their authority.
Okay, so you'll be providing a version of it that includes some suggested edits, but not as like a final draft or something. Like they'll be visible in track changes or something for the commission, or is it just a
No, it will be a
clean
clean document
version?
of what
Okay.
our staff recommendations are.
Oh, I see. Okay. And so you'll present that to the commission, and then will they take public comment on it at that time as well?
No.
No. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. So the role of the rec is over at this point. I can share the final packet that will go to our commission when it becomes published, which is usually 2 weeks before their meeting. So that is June 25th. And that's the day in which this topic, I think, will be on the agenda. And so, yeah, we can share that staff packet with you all once it's completed. It will go through one more round of DOJ review as well, the Department of Justice review, before the rule is finalized. All right, well, that's it. So I appreciate everyone so much for being here and being part of this process. I know that is time consuming and gets into the nitty gritty details of things, but definitely appreciate all of your time and effort and expertise on this issue, and the rules are definitely better for it. So I definitely appreciate you all, and please continue to reach out if you have questions or thoughts along the way, and continue to engage with us in the future on this topic. So thank you all, and we'll hopefully see you all soon.